to turn the floor over to Bee Bagby, who's going to introduce our keynote speaker. Professor Bagby is an assistant professor of information systems technology, and he's the head of the Cybersecurity Center at Virginia Western Community College. He's also a member of the Virginia Cyber Range Executive Committee. So Bee, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David. Hey, so I'm really excited to introduce David Oranchak today. David is a software engineer who's been building web and database applications for over 20 years. His interest in puzzles, cryptology, generative creative works developed into a book on Shinro puzzles and a comprehensive website dedicated to the unsolved Zodiac killer cryptograms. His expertise on the Zodiac ciphers has led to his involvement with several Zodiac-related documentaries and development of cryptanalysis software for the FBI. In December 2020, he was a part of the team that cracked the famous unsolved 340-character cryptogram of the Zodiac killer, and I could not be more excited to have him here today to talk to us. So with that, Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, B, thank you very much. All right, let me share my screen, get these slides up. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, great.
We've got your slides.
Awesome. And find that present button.
Looks great.
Okay. Oop. Turn on the laser pointer. All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming out to the keynote speech. As everyone knows, 2020 was a pretty crazy year. COVID-19 was everywhere. It changed everyone's lives, and it drove a lot of people indoors for lockdowns and quarantines. But you know, a lot of people were looking for things to do while stuck inside. And in my case, I'm pretty used to working from home. So one of my hobbies has been to try to crack this unsolved cipher sent by an unidentified serial killer who was active over 50 years ago. And this is him, the Zodiac killer. He's never been caught. This is the best picture we have of him. It's a police sketch based on witness descriptions. And this is the famous unsolved cipher that he sent over 51 years ago. I first saw it online somewhere on an old website about 15 years ago, and I kind of got obsessed with it around that point. I'd gotten extremely curious about what kind of creepy message the killer was hiding underneath all of those mysterious symbols. And since we're at a cybersecurity conference, maybe we should ask, what kind of information security was the killer using to protect his secret message? So what I managed to do was I teamed up with some other people who also had some time on their hands during the pandemic. And we reached the end of that crazy year 2020 with a surprising success. We actually managed to hack into the Zodiac killer's secret message. And so as you can see here, Zodiac hand wrote his cipher. He used basically a pen and paper method to create his ciphers. And he's not the only criminal to hide messages this way. And so I thought it would be useful to take a quick look at some other examples of criminals and how they use pen and paper systems to achieve some sort of information security with their secrets. So this guy, he was arrested for raping and murdering an 11-year-old girl. And while he was in jail waiting for trial, he was writing these enciphered messages to his brother. And he was using this mix of numbers and symbols. So when you look at it, it looks just like a bunch of arithmetic. It's like, why is this guy writing a bunch of math problems on a piece of paper? But the numbers and symbols were actually substitutions for letters of his secret message. And he had written that secret message backwards. Well, people got suspicious, and then they sent this to the FBI. And the FBI very quickly was able to crack the message. And it was full of incriminating details about his crime. So unfortunately for him, his information security was very weak and was not good enough to hide his message. And that did not help his case at all. Here's another example of some weak information security. These are Aryan Brotherhood gang leaders that were already in prison. And what they were doing was ordering gang members to go to war against a rival gang of Black inmates. And one way they did it was by mailing letters that, when you first look at them, they look pretty innocent. There's nothing really suspicious about them. And this letter is an example. It's basically just a letter that seems to be this guy announcing that he's just become a grandfather. He says, just a line to let you know all is well and hoping you are the same. Well, I am a grandfather. At last, my boy's wife gave birth to a baby boy. So there doesn't seem to be anything suspicious there unless you look a little bit closer. And it turns out that this letter is using what's called a Baconian cipher, otherwise known as a biliteral cipher. And the key to it is to notice that it's using two different kinds of handwriting. There's like this these curly looking letters, and then these very plainly printed letters. And so you mark the letters with A's and B's depending on which handwriting is being used for that letter. And then you split those into groups of 5 letters. And then there's a substitution key that you apply to each of those groups. And when you decode using that key, you get a secret message that says, confirm message from Chris to move on DC Blacks. So that's basically the gang leaders ordering a gang war. So this is a way basically to hide a message in plain sight. You know, normally when you look at an encrypted message nowadays, you see a bunch of gibberish. And so you suspect that there's some kind of encryption going on. But in this case, you may not notice that there's some kind of encryption going on because it just looks like a normal letter. But once you identify that that system is being used, it's pretty easy to break. So the information security is ultimately weak as long as you can identify that it's being used. On the other hand, here's somebody who had really strong information security. This is Ted Kaczynski, known as the Unabomber. He was killing and injuring people by sending bombs in the mail. And the FBI eventually caught him. They raided his cabin and collected a whole bunch of evidence and found hundreds of unreadable encrypted pages from his personal journal where he was out detailing so much of his life and his crimes. And what he had done was he had invented his own encryption method, which was practically impossible to break because it had really long numerical keys like the ones you see in this slide. And not only did you have to have the numbers, but you had to know where to start reading them, what direction to go in, how to change the directions, and how to apply those to the enciphered message in order to recover the plain text. And you also had to look up some of the numbers in a special dictionary that he had made. So it had a list of words and letters and phrases and things that were like special substitutions for some of these numbers. So basically, it was this really complicated encryption scheme, all done with just pen and paper. But the problem was, even though he had this really strong information security, he left everything out in the open in his cabin. And the FBI basically found all of the keys and the complete procedure to break his enciphered journals. So this is basically like when you come up with really strong passwords, but you leave them lying around just written on sticky notes. So it's very similar to that. All right, so the subject at hand, let's look back at the Zodiac Killer. Over 50 years ago, he started a crime spree where he attacked at least 7 people. There were 3 young couples and a cab driver, and 5 of the victims were killed, and 2 of them survived. After the crimes, he mailed letters and cryptograms to newspapers. And basically what he was doing was taunting the police and the public, and he was trying to increase his notoriety and trying to get the papers to keep putting stories about him out there. So he would kind of inflate his persona more and more and create a lot of fear among the population. So along the way, he created 4 cryptograms in total. The first one here on the left, that one was solved back in 1969. The second one is the one that wasn't solved until last year. And the remaining two over here, those are still unsolved. So if anyone wants to give those a try, I would encourage that. So here's the first cipher he sent. He had split it up into 3 parts and sent it to 3 different newspapers right after his very first attacks. And it's often called the 408 cipher because it's 408 symbols long in total. And in the letters that came with the ciphers, he was claiming that the cipher contained his identity. So he was trying to encourage people to crack it. Maybe they would find out who he was. The other thing he did was he said he would go on a killing rampage unless the papers published the ciphers in the papers. So the papers eventually did publish the ciphers and sent them to the police to try to get their help. And then the police sent them to some cryptography experts to try to crack them. But before the police or the experts could do it, this couple cracked the codes. And this is Donald and Betty Harden. They were not professional code breakers. Donald was a high school teacher and Betty was a housewife. They saw the cipher in the paper and decided to give it a try and cracked it using traditional code breaking techniques and a lot of trial and error. It took them about 20 hours split over 2 or 3 days and completely by hand. They had done it completely by hand. And the way they did it, well, they didn't have home computers. This was back in 1969. So they had to do it the hard way, pen and paper. Donald was interested in code breaking since he was a boy. So he had some experience cracking codes for fun, you know, the little puzzle type ones that you see in newspapers and magazines. Reportedly, they used this book called Secret and Urgent by Fletcher Pratt. And it had some code breaking tips in it, such as doing frequency analysis where you count up the cipher symbols and you use that information to try to guess which symbols stand for which letters of the alphabet. One of the code breaking tips from the book was about doubled letters. And one thing that the Hardens noticed were these doubled symbols in the cipher. Like here at the top, we have this half-filled square, this pair of half-filled squares. And then down here, we have another pair of filled squares. And in the book, it tells you, you know, which doubled letters are more frequent than others in just normal English text. If you look through any English source, you'll see that the most common doubled letter that appears is LL, because there's a lot of words that have double L's in them. And so the Hardens guessed that these symbols were standing for L's. And it turns out that they were right. So that was one key into the solution for that cipher. And so after a lot of trial and error and finding a bunch of other patterns that they could exploit and using insights from Betty about what she thought the message might say, they gradually arrived at the solution for the 408. It was a simple substitution cipher, but it was a little bit harder to solve than the normal ones because there were 54 symbols in the cipher alphabet. So there's 54 symbols in the key instead of just 26, which you would expect for a normal substitution. For example, when Zodiac made this cipher, he used 7 different special symbols to stand for the plaintext letter E. And that was to disguise how common the letter E is in English. Now, the message doesn't really say much. It's mostly just him bragging about killing and why he enjoys it. And he says, "I like killing people because it's so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience." And then he goes on. And it's a message from a crazy person. Ultimately, the encryption wasn't very strong. So weak information security. It was vulnerable to a simple pen and paper attack. And it was even solved by amateur code breakers. It didn't even require, expert cryptanalysts to figure it out. So by about 3 months later, the Zodiac killer had attacked another young couple at a secluded lake, as well as a cab driver in San Francisco. Then he mailed a greeting card to the San Francisco Chronicle newspaper, and this time he included another cipher. Once again, the cipher is accompanied with a vague threat to commit more crimes unless the papers put the cipher on their front pages. And this cipher is often called the 340 because it is 340 symbols long. But this one, unfortunately, wasn't solved in a few days like the first one was. That wouldn't happen for at least 51 years. So 51 years, that was a lot of time to try out ideas. This is an excerpt from an FBI file about the Zodiac case. It describes some stuff that they tried to break the cipher. They tried using the key from the first cipher. They tried combining that key with rearrangements of the ciphertext instead of reading it in the normal direction. They tried plugging in different words and phrases that they thought the Zodiac would use. And they had some access to computer programs to help out. To keep in mind, this was back in 1969, so the technology was still kind of limited. But ultimately, all of those attempts failed. They were unable to get any plain text out of the 340 cipher. And then over the years, the cipher drew a lot of attention from amateur code breakers who tried to come up with solutions of their own. And in my 15 years of looking at this cipher, I have seen probably thousands of proposals for solutions for this thing. And they find very creative ways to extract information from the cipher. So they'll find pieces of words, phrases, numbers, names, and dates. Sometimes they'd find full solutions. But most of the time, what they would find are just like random coincidences and noise, things that would match up with details of the case or whatever suspect they're interested in. Or they'll find things they imagine Zodiac might be saying. But in general, they would use methods that couldn't be proven to be correct because you can use the same methods to produce multiple plausible solutions. And so there's no good way to exclude all the different other possibilities. Unlike the first cipher, where that method can only produce one coherent text. And then over the years, communities of people interested in the case started forming and gathering in online message boards and social media groups to exchange ideas about the Zodiac case. And here's some example sites that have cropped up over the years. And people in the community will compare suspects and explore code breaking ideas. And, it's like there's a lot of fighting that goes on because people will get interested in certain suspects and they argue back and forth about which suspect is better. And then people will propose code breaking solutions and it turns into a mess. But I did meet a lot of good researchers and code breakers in these communities and learned a lot from their ideas. On the academic side of things, the ciphers were often the focus of academic research. And these are clippings from various research papers that I've seen over the years that explored the Zodiac ciphers and different methods to try to solve them. A lot of the research was focused on computer-aided methods of cracking ciphers that are similar to the 408. So a lot of these researchers initially thought, well, if we start writing computer algorithms that can solve the 408 cipher automatically, then maybe we'll have a better chance of solving the 340. But the big assumption there is if the 340 is written in the same way as the 408, then it's within the realm of possibilities. But much of this research failed to crack the cipher. So gradually, researchers started to acknowledge the possibility that the cipher might involve multiple steps. Maybe it wasn't just a substitution cipher like the first one. For example, this first paper suggests that the Zodiac 340 is a combination of a homophonic substitution cipher, which is what the 408 was, and a certain column transposition. So that's interesting. It's two different kinds of encryption combined together. And there's another paper that suggests that the cipher may not only use a homophonic cipher, but also another encryption method, such as transposition. So they were starting to explore those different possibilities. Many people, including me, also believed that there were multiple steps, because if this cipher had really been just like the first one, we would have had a solution to it by now, because we have really good tools that are awesome at solving substitution ciphers. Like there's so many out there that can solve the 408 in an instant without knowing anything else about the code other than the actual ciphertext. One example of one of these code breaking tools is called ZK Decrypto. It kind of developed out of the community of Zodiac researchers. It's called ZK Decrypto. It was created in the early 2000s. It was one of the first programs that I know of that could automatically solve Zodiac's first cipher without any human intervention. So you could just feed it the ciphertext and it would spit out the answer. Basically what it does is when you give it a substitution cipher to solve, it tries to find the best key to solve it. And because there are too many possible keys to look through, you can't just have the computer test them one by one, because there's not enough time left in the life of the universe to do that. So it has to do a smarter search. It has to basically take a random key and then gradually try to improve it to make the plain text gradually better until hopefully the correct plain text is found. And then this screenshot is an example of the code breaking software finding the correct solution for the 408 cipher. So the whole 408's plain text is there. And people were using this software to create a lot of experiments for the 340. So they were trying to feed the 340's ciphertext into the program in different ways. So one of our teammates, a programmer in Belgium named Jarl van Eyck, he was inspired by that ZK Decrypto code breaking software, and he made his own version of it. And he made it very powerful, and he made it extremely fast. He added a lot of optimizations to it, added more features. It will create a bunch of statistics based on the ciphers that you put in, so you can do some more extensive cryptanalysis on the ciphers to try to gather clues. And it can solve ciphers of multiple types, different kinds of transpositions, as well as substitution ciphers. So this was a perfect platform for us to start running experiments. See, here's some example transpositions that we considered for the 340. The basic idea is maybe Zodiac wrote out his message into, say, a grid layout and then rearranged it before assigning the special symbols to the letters. So for example, for columnar transposition, instead of reading the message from left to right, you would read it along these columns. And then for diagonal, you're just reading the text along the diagonals. And then L root is following these L shapes throughout the grid. Rail fence is a kind of transposition where you write the message in this zigzag pattern, and then you read it out horizontally, and then you end up with this gibberish. But if you reverse the process, you'll get the original message. This snake transposition is similar. It's using a zigzag pattern to read through the plain text. And then the spiral, you start in the middle or the outside, and you work your way around through the spiral shape. So there are so many possibilities. There's so many things you can do to a message before encrypting it using a substitution key. You're limited only by your imagination. But none of these really simple schemes turned up anything. So more elaborate schemes had to be explored. Our teammate, Jarl, he actually came very close to finding the correct rearrangement of the 340 back in May of 2020. and he posted about it on a Zodiac message board. He basically said, maybe there's a special reading order to break the cipher, but it gets interrupted because maybe the cipher is split up in some way. And so he proposed this scheme where you have 3 sections, this top section of 9 lines, this second section of 9 lines, and this bottom section of 2 lines. And the reading order, which is what he's referring to here as period 19 or period 15, is basically you're reading the message instead of from left to right, you're reading it diagonally. So you start at 1, you go to 2, go to 3, 4, and so on. And when you get to the bottom of the section, you go back up to the first line again, and you continue, and you're basically scanning that section along the diagonals all the way through. Then you do the same thing to the bottom section, and then you do something similar to the last 2 lines. So this turned out to be, I don't know, maybe like 80% correct. He was extremely close. But what happened was he fed that transposition into his code breaking software, and it didn't produce anything interesting. It didn't stand out. The plain text didn't stand out to him. So he moved on to other experiments, which was unfortunate. But meanwhile, our other teammate was making progress. This is Australian mathematician Sam Blake. And throughout 2020, he was sending me around 650,000 different rearrangements of the ciphertext. These are just kind of like representative examples of the different rearrangements. And what we were doing was trying to find one that would unlock the message. And he basically wrote programs to systematically generate all these variations. Then we gradually fed all those 650,000 manipulations of the 340 into Jarl's code-breaking software to try to find interesting messages. And it was a huge amount of work. It took us months to process all of that. And so the software generates a lot of plain text messages, and I spent a lot of time looking through them, trying to find interesting words and phrases, things that the killer might be saying. And normally what you get out from the code breaking software is all gibberish and nonsense. But this particular one caught my eye. It had a high score from the code breaking software, which basically means it has a lot of things that look like English, but it's not quite right. But there's a couple of things that look interesting, like hope you are trying to catch me and the gas chamber. So that really stood out when I saw it. It seems like things that Zodiac would talk about. And they're connected concepts. You know, if you get caught for killing people, you'll get sent to the gas chamber, perhaps. So the strategy for cracking that first section was to plug those phrases back into the code breaking software, but let the code breaking software try to solve the rest of the section on its own. So basically we're locking in these phrases and telling the code breaking software, look at all the keys that you can, but don't mess with these because we think these are right. So it says, hope you are trying to catch me, and then the gas chamber. And one of the benefits of doing it this way, which is called, it's called cribbing, is it reduces the amount of keys that you have to search through. So the software has an easier time finding an answer if there is one. And so after I plugged that in and clicked solve with cribs, I ended up seeing this message, and it popped out almost immediately. And it says, I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show, which brings up a point about me. I'm not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the. So that really knocked me out of my chair when I saw that. So the phrases in bold were the ones that we locked into the cipher, and the red section, that wasn't me on the TV show, really stood out because that's how I knew that the solution was the real deal. And the reason is because about 2 weeks before Zodiac sent the 340, somebody called into a live TV talk show and claimed to be the Zodiac killer. And then the caller said that he needed help and didn't want to go to the gas chamber. So the solution we found referenced these things. So we knew we were on the right track. So we had the solution for the first section. Now what about this second section? We fed it into the solver software and got some text that seemed almost right, but was still quite messed up. There were only a few recognizable words. It took some time to work it out, but we figured out that these highlighted sections were interfering with the diagonal reading rule. This top one had to be skipped altogether. And then this lower section had to be shifted one position to the right. So when we fixed those, more of the message popped out. It was starting to make a lot more sense now. It says, sooner because I now have enough slaves to work for me, whereas everyone else has nothing when they reach paradise, so they are afraid of death. I am not afraid because I know that mine knew. All right, so now we have those last two lines. And of course, we found a problem with those too. They didn't just give us the answer right away. Some words were appearing normally, like the words will, easy, and death. But the decryptions for these yellow sections looked messed up until we realized that the words were simply written backwards. So when we reversed those words, we got this. Life will be an easy one in paradise, and life is death. So now we have the entire message for the 340. The entire ciphertext decrypts to a coherent message, which says, I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show, which brings up a point about me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner because I now have enough slaves to work for me, where everyone else has nothing when they reach paradise. So they are afraid of death. I am not afraid because I know that my new life will be an easy one in paradise. Life is death. So at this point, we were certain we had the right answer. It fits the case timeline perfectly. He wrote about paradise and slaves in this cipher, as well as his first cipher and in his letters. But the cipher, the answer to this cipher doesn't really give us anything useful, like his name or any other identifying clue, which is kind of disappointing. But maybe there's something like that in one of the remaining ciphers or in one of the letters. So we sent the solution to the FBI's code breaking unit. They quickly confirmed it. They made victim notifications. And then once that was done, we were cleared to announce the solution to the public, which I did via my YouTube channel. I have a video series called Let's Crack Zodiac. And if you're interested in all the details and analysis about the 340, episodes 5 and 6, if you watch those, there's a lot of interesting details in those. So this is the press statement that the San Francisco division of the FBI put out. It says, the FBI is aware that a cipher attributed to the Zodiac Killer was recently solved by private citizens. The Zodiac Killer case remains an ongoing investigation. And it goes on to say that the case is still open, so they're not going to give any more details. And then our solution was also looked at by a lot of the other people in the code breaking community, and there was a lot of analysis and confirmations of the solution from them as well. But the Zodiac crypto story doesn't end there. We still have these two more ciphers that he sent that are still unsolved to this day. They're both really short ciphers. The first one says, this is the Zodiac speaking. By the way, have you cracked the last cipher I sent you? So there he's referring back to the 340. My name is blank. And then he has these 13 symbols. So that one's pretty interesting to people because it seems to promise that there's a name in there. So a lot of people have tried a lot of different names. The second cipher came with a map and refers to a bomb that he supposedly planted somewhere. It says the map coupled with this code will tell you where the bomb is set. You have until next fall to dig it up. And then there's these 32 symbols. So a lot of people have been trying to solve these two ciphers, but I'm not very hopeful. And the reason is because the ciphertexts are so short, you can fit thousands of solutions into them perfectly, but they can't all be right. So you don't really have a way to exclude, like an effective way to exclude solutions. You kind of have to use subjective methods to pick the ones that you like, and those subjective methods don't really stand up to peer review. And they can't all be right. So that's the difficulty we face with these ciphers. So some final thoughts about Zodiac's cryptography. His first cipher had very weak information security. It only took a few days to crack using pretty simple methods. But his second cipher used crude methods, but had much stronger information security because it took 51 years to crack. But what exactly made it strong? Well, one thing is it was a homemade system. There were no other examples exactly like it, so it wasn't well studied or anticipated by code breakers. And I think that's a good example of security through obscurity. You know, if nobody knows what kind of lock and key you're using, then they won't know how to break in. Another reason it went so long without being solved was that most code breakers expected the single scheme to be applied to the entire cipher. So they'd come up with an idea and try it for the entire grid. But it ended up being split into 3 separate sections. And so that really messed up a lot of code breakers' analysis. On top of that, he used an unusual transposition rule. So in each one of those sections, he had the diagonal reading order. And then in the last 2 lines, he deviated from that and used a word reversal scheme. So those aren't very intuitive. You know, that's not the first thing you think of when you look at a puzzle like this. On top of that, he made some mistakes, like the line that we had to shift and the misspellings. He had some misspellings in his message. And he also purposefully interrupted the scheme in that second section, and we had to work around that. So that was another level of difficulty. So basically, the slowest part of this whole process was identifying the scheme. You know, it took 51 years just to identify what the hell he was doing with this encryption. But once the scheme is identified, the code breaks easily. You can just unfold it, unfold the cipher in the right way, and then stick it into the code breaking software, and you get the answer out right away. And so any message that you would encode using this scheme could be easily broken. So the information security is weak if you know what the scheme is to begin with. So that's the crux of the difficulty there. And so the other question that I wanted to explore is, why did he encrypt these messages in the first place? We know from his first 2 encoded messages that he didn't reveal anything useful. He's just taunting or bragging about killing. And it seemed like he just wanted to play games with the public and cause fear rather than reveal anything useful that could incriminate him. And that's different from other criminals who try hard to hide secrets. You know, they're trying not to incriminate themselves, or they're trying to maintain the security of communicating with other criminals and things like that. But there's still a possibility that he did hide some incriminating information somewhere. What if there's another layer of encryption that we haven't detected yet, like that Baconian cipher that I pointed out at the beginning? What if he came up with some system like that, where he did encode something that he doesn't think people can discover? So that's part of the appeal of this case, is that those possibilities exist and people are always trying out different ideas. So, you know, the other thing about this was we relied heavily on computers to help us break it, which wasn't possible back then, you know, unless you amass this huge effort. You know, enough of the authorities would have to be invested in, you know, developing this a huge bank of computers that could try out all these things. But it just didn't seem practical at the time. So it really took a progression of technology to kind of help lead to this success. And the other thing that led to success was there was many years of gradual progress and effort from all these other experiments that people have tried and failed with. And along the way, useful information comes from them. So there were a lot of people that contributed over the years. You know, our little 3-person team finally hacked the cipher back in December, but many others came before us with contributions that helped us. So it definitely takes a village. And my hope is that somebody will get lucky and figure out how to prove the solution to either of those remaining ciphers. And then one final point, there's still a lot of other unsolved codes and ciphers out there that have been created by hand, possibly with unusual or homemade schemes, or maybe there's encoding mistakes. Can they be solved too? Our success with this cipher gives me a lot of hope that they can. And so I'm looking forward to seeing more progress along those lines. And that's it. I will open the floor to questions.
So if anybody has questions, please do post them in the chat, either the Hoova chat or the Zoom chat. And I'll kind of kick things off. So this is pretty interesting. It seems like your solution is widely accepted as the solution. David, is that correct?
That's right.
But it sounds like some people think it might be just a step on a path to a final solution, because you said that people think that there might be more encoding in the actual text somehow.
Yeah, there's people are still trying out those things. There's different approaches for that. One is to take the solution that we came up with and try to build on that. And another is to just discount it entirely and assume that it's a red herring or something. That's kind of a minority view, I believe. But the majority of people that look through the solution and understand how it works, they believe that the answer we arrived at is the correct answer for it. But that does not exclude the possibility that there's some other scheme going on somewhere that might reveal more information.
Yeah, that's cool. Another thing I find interesting is that it seems like, at least with the 408 cipher, it's so it's not necessary. So you could have different cipher texts that turn into the same plain text, right? Because if you have multiple substitutions for the same letters, then could you have a different cipher text with the same plain text output?
It depends on the scheme. Yeah. The way the ciphers, the first two ciphers are designed is that a single plain text letter can map to one or more of the special symbols that Zodiac used.
Yeah.
But it doesn't usually go the other way around, except for portions where he was making mistakes, where he made encoding errors, and then like one of the cipher symbols will stand for an S in one place and then an A somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so that also adds to the decryption difficulty.
Right. Oh yeah, for sure. So here's a question from the Zoom chat. What was your initial reaction when you saw the solution? Was it second guessing your results, or did you realize that you had finally gotten it?
Well, when I first started doing this 15 years ago, I had a lot of moments where I thought I was on the right track, but ended up, failing miserably. Because every once in a while, some algorithm will pop out something that looks like an interesting message. It'll say kill or death or shoot or something like that, and then you get excited. But I went through a lot of cycles of that, and then finally just realized, okay, it's going to take a lot to convince me that I've gotten the right solution. And over the years, people present me with solutions, so I know the traps that people fall into when they think they're on the right track. So when we were starting to get those phrases that I mentioned earlier, like that wasn't me on the TV show, that's the one that really sealed the deal for me. Mm-hmm. Because as soon as I saw that, because I knew the background of the case, I knew that that was contemporary, because the cipher had been written like 2 weeks before that.
Yeah.
I mean, 2 weeks after that, rather. And then the other factor there was we didn't have to coax that phrase out. We locked in the other words that we thought were right, and then we left the code breaking software alone to try to find the rest of it. And the fact that it found that phrase, as well as the other words that were part of that first section, that too helped seal the deal for me.
Yeah, that's cool. So here's another chat question. Has a profile been developed based on this? I guess based on the ciphers. For example, does the type of cipher indicate that he was very educated, or perhaps even a cryptographer?
I'm still kind of mixed about that, at least personally. My personal feeling about his expertise it's kind of mixed. He could be it could be that he learned cryptography in the military or something like that, but he could have also picked it up by reading like the detective fiction pulp magazines from his era, because in those days there were, these detective stories that were full of cryptography. Like a criminal would leave an enciphered note somewhere and it would describe a bomb. I mean, there's a lot of the same themes that he uses in his letters. So he could have been reading a lot of those and getting some of that knowledge there. But as far as like professional grade profiles, I think some people have worked on those, but I don't know. That just all seems very subjective. But some of them are based on the geography of the crimes, and but I would say he's fairly intelligent. He's like a creative person because he draws all these influences into his writings. A lot of pop culture at the time he was drawing in, and he knew enough about cryptography to abuse it because the first two ciphers, they use some pretty obscure things. I mean, not too many people knew about homophonic substitution, which is what he used for the first one. And then the second one, he really went off the rails, and it looks like a homemade scheme. It doesn't look like there's an exact scheme like that somewhere, in the literature. Like there's a military cryptanalysis manual. It's an Army manual, I think. And it describes some of those like triangular based encryption schemes. So there's some similarities there where, things are written diagonally, but it's not clear that would be like, it's not like an exact match to what he did. So it's hard to say where he learned this stuff.
Yeah. So here's another chat question. Has anyone else offered anything else as a complete solution?
Over the years, yeah. Yeah, and recently there's a couple of holdouts, people they're kind of delusional. This case attracts so many different kinds of people, and a lot of them are reasonable, and some of them are, they're trying things in good faith, but then others are they're just delusional. They come up with these really off the rails proposals for what they think the solutions are, and it's kind of a mess. But yeah, they're out there, but don't put any stock into them.
Okay. So what are you working on now? You're working on any other cool cipher now that you solved this one?
We've been playing around a little bit with those last two ciphers, nothing serious. Like Sam and I have done some stuff, but like I said, there's not much hope for those because they're so short. They're going to be nearly impossible to prove compared to the first two. The first two are much longer, so it's practically impossible to use the same methods to produce like an alternate solution that would be as believable as the main one. But there's other interesting unsolved mysteries out there, not just with the Zodiac case, but there's other criminal ciphers that haven't been solved. And there's like the Beale ciphers. There's two of those that are unsolved, and they have some similarity to homophonic substitution. So there's some overlap there and some interesting stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool.